starting with lawyers, I'm going to start with a theme that is common to us and a few others in the room. How does your background as a lawyer, so think about all the tools and tricks of the trade that you learnt and valued, how does all this inform your current role as the Race Discrimination Commissioner?
Okay. Even in not without...
in 25 words or less.
Oh, very helpful, thank you. This position I have, it's very legalistic. It is, in fact, Human Rights Commission portfolio. It's about laws. It's about UN conventions. It's about interplay of the legal system. So, in fact, one of the things that I found quite interesting was the fact that we're so, I suppose, engrossed in the legal perspective. Sometimes it took a while for me to get into this. Now, I'll give an example very quickly. When I did multiculturalism in Victoria, as a lawyer, I took off my lawyer's hat and I left it aside. I went community. And you could get away with that in the multicultural field without being a lawyer or thinking like a lawyer. When I got back into this role, I defined a cap, put it back on.
Yes.
Because I did think like a lawyer to do this job. So it is important. That background stands me in good stead because it is a very important element to understand the legal complexity of those issues we're dealing with.
So Australia is in good hands.
I don't know about this. You didn't ask me how good a lawyer I was, but I'll tell you another day.
So we have, there's a campaign that the Australian Human Rights Commission is currently running, and the campaign is called Racism, It Stops With Me.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what this campaign is and why is it so important? The racism, it stops with me.
The campaign actually came about during the term, I think, way back in 2011, when there was a government support for a national anti-racism partnership campaign. So it's got some funding and it ran for a period of time. And I might say that the funding has actually run out. So we're seeking new funding to allow us to do more work in this particular area. The essence of that campaign was that it featured prominently as an important focus the need to be visible in the conversation and discussion about racism, and that we need to call it out. We need to be able to bring this important element of the discussion that we as Australians may not totally be comfortable in dealing with to a community level where we are able to discuss this. But more importantly, it was empowering people who are the victims, who are being involved in some ways, on the other end of the race equation, the power to know they're protected and supported, and giving bystanders opportunities to understand what their responsibility might be. So it is a societal responsibility. Let's deal with racism, and let's do it in a particular way. And the way was, let's call it out, right? And for me, it's an important element of what I continue to do. There are different aspects of which I want to focus on as well, including education as one way of getting about dealing with the same issue.
That answer beautifully dovetails into where I want to take you next. Social media.
Yeah.
You tweet, I tweet, others in the room are also tweeters. Tell me a little bit about social media. What role does social media play, whether it be positive, whether it be negative, is it just benign? What does it play, what role is it in terms of Australia's race relations, this place of social media? And you've just given examples of bystanders calling it out or empowering those without a voice. Let's have a look at social media.
Okay. Well, Elizabeth, social media by itself has engrossed me sufficiently to think that I want to devote this as a particular topic of my turn to look into. I don't have the resources yet, but I want to. There are a few other issues I want to look into in education. Perhaps the far-right issues might be one. Islamophobia is coming up as an issue. And so there are a few things that I want to look into, and social media is one. We can't say we got all the expertise we need, but we do the best we can. The problem with social media is that it's a wonderful, wonderful resource, but it's also a very, very destructive instrument at the same time. And part of that is the lack of control and the lack of ability to control an area which is really a free medium. Where the hurt comes from is, in the Muslim community, because we're doing a consultation currently in the Muslim community, is that they can't get into social media without being vilified. The sort of things that comes through every day, every moment. For a simple little thing that they want to get into for communication purposes, they can't do it in safety. And they can't even do it in a meaningful way because there's so much of the hatred that comes through there. And so for me, I don't have the answers. The government's grappling with that issue. But I do see that social media is an instrument that needs to be perhaps in some ways, I'm not sure what is controlled, but it needs to be harnessed in a way that is going to ensure that where it comes to race and religious vilification and hatred, that it does not become, in fact, the rigorous medium for which people are using that to vent hatred and vilification against people. So it is an area we want to look into, but it's an area we want to, in fact, offer some sort of capacity to protect people against vilification.
And that's an area that I think the government is looking into in terms of social media and accountability of those who publish a comment. And I use the word publish quite deliberately, publish a comment in social media and then being accountable for what you do and say and the hurt that you might inflict. Now, we're here today to talk about leadership, board leadership, government leadership. Let's have a look at quotas and targets.
Okay.
I want to explore with
Favourite
you,
topics,
Chin.
yes.
Yes. Tell me about your view on targets or quotas when it comes to the aim of increasing diversity in our boardrooms, when it comes to diversity on positions of leadership.
I'm not there yet with quotas. I still need to firm up my views about the pros and cons. I understand the issues, but it's got implications. I'm more comfortable with the notion of targets, right? Voluntary targets. There's more ownership when it's targets because everyone understands that they want it, or most people want it within organizations.
I like that concept. So there's more ownership when there's a target.
There is. Quotas sometimes are enforced, and people may resent them. But with the whole notion of targets, it means it brings together an organization. It brings about community and said, we're trying to do this. And obviously, if there's no support for it, it won't happen. So there's this notion behind it that is supported, at least by the majority, right? And it's got more achievable outcomes. Right? It's taking steps that are important. There may be baby steps, but it's there. And if you launch a quota, some organizations may not even go near it and not have the capacity to even entertain it in any form. So I'd rather have small wins along the way and get results through targets. But again, I emphasize the point, it has to be voluntary at this point.
And in terms of setting these targets and the ownership, does setting a target include owning the time frame for achieving those targets?
I think it's important. You need to have a time frame, otherwise, you can go on for the next 20 years, and get 2 more people up on the board. It has to be within the equation of time and outcome.
Earlier, you mentioned Islamophobia as something that you wanted to talk about, and you gave some examples of vilification when just merely wanting to participate in communications. There's a study that was done by Charles Sturt University, and it found that Muslim women were found to be most at risk of experiencing Islamophobia, with most attacks actually occurring in public. Is enough being done to protect this segment in our community?
The short answer is we can do better. I was there to launch the report, in fact, Dr. Enya, who is the author behind that, and we subscribe a lot to what has been said in the report. It's not the only report that's come out that says that, there are other reports more recent as well that confirms very much that Islamophobia is an issue. Where again, in terms of our community, Britain has gone very far with that. There have been inter-parliamentary groups that have done, parliamentarians all sides, came together and had a consultation 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The report came out in 2017 that explored Islamophobia, and they defined it. Right? We haven't done that, and it's hard to imagine that our parliamentarians would, at any time soon, get into that same sort of a frame of mind. But the fact remains is this: is Islamophobia an issue? What in fact we call Islamophobia or anything else? And we haven't in this country settled on that and said we think it's Islamophobia and we call it by name. Britain has done that and has defined it too. I hope we do at some point get to recognize that this is a serious issue about how Muslims in these countries have been treated and singled out as people for which it's a fair game for others to vilify because they look different. The religion that few people understand. So in terms of where the report that you mentioned was important, the fact that it was the brazenness with which attacks now happen in places, the public, where security officers are there, and yet it happens. So which means the norm is that people don't think that's a problem. They can vilify anyone they want, security or otherwise. Is there enough being done? I don't think there is any federal approach to this. States may have different programs in place that would deal with this, but I think federally we need to have a good look at how we can do it. And I think the Human Rights Commissioner will be quite happy, and Ross is going to give you some money to do that, to see what we can do to frame down and find ways to deal with a big issue that involves a community. And can I also say, there's not just the Muslim community, Jewish community have felt that there was an increase in anti-Semitic.
That's right.
Sort of utterances and acts. And so there's a general across the board that minorities particularly, and then some groups more than others, have been targeted. And the question is now in people's minds is there a rise in racism? I can't say there is because there hasn't been any real research done to explore and to notch that out. But obviously, from the visible perspective, there seems to be very uncomfortable incidents of racism, and we need to be able to tackle that. And a lot of that will be about education as well.
So I'm going to tackle a hard question with you. Earlier in the introduction, what we do here is we look at the hard questions and the hard issues.
Sure.
We're looking at racism. Chinese political influence has been in the news.
That's an easy one.
Can we, as Australians, can we have a public conversation about this without alienating, without maligning the many Chinese Australians who call Australia home?
Yeah. Alan Gingell, in a recent article in Foreign Affairs, and he was the head of the ONA, the National Assessment Office, and now he works at ANU. It's a long book about how we deal with China, and it's got little paragraph says that we have not adequately engaged in a proper conversation with Australian Chinese in a relation with China. And that remains the case. I mean, I don't know what we can do, but I certainly would speak to Ross about writing to the Prime Minister saying, you need to have a conversation. Yeah? You need to engage and bring them to the confidence. Right now, everyone is uncertain where they sit or stand. In fact, if they're sitting at all on this issue, because it's so nebulous, it's so difficult, and when you got security imperatives that's driving it, people tend to be very difficult and diffident about it. My view of this is that there are clearly security issues, and we need to be mindful of that. But we need to separate that from every other issues. If there's ideological difference with China, well, that is not a security issue per se, it's differences we have. And it ought not be brought in for those who might support China because they like communism, well, so be it, it's a free country. But the real issue is about what are the real security threats to us, and how does that morph into people being able to support. And I can tell you one thing, 1.2 million Australians with Chinese heritage are equally into this issue of protecting national and security interests as well. Just that they don't know what we're talking about and how to do this and which element. And the difficulty, of course, is that we are talking about associations and communities that have been involved in this cultural sense of China as a motherland. We all know what it means to be a good Italian and Jewish. This whole notion of the cultural linkage to your home is where does it draw the line where it becomes dangerous? And is it going to be dangerous? We don't know what it means. I went to a recent event as invited here by the Chinese Masonic Association. I might give myself a little bit of strife for doing that because 165th anniversary, that's formed in 1854. That's a long time ago, all right? And so I went for that celebration. But the difficulty, of course, is that when you have a group that set through and was formed ostensibly for the collective community, Chinese community, and offering fraternity and support, way back in 1854, when there was the Qing dynasty that has still half a century to run. And this is the same group that saw through Sun Yat-sen, who attempted to bring about democracy in the country. And then we saw that period of the warlords when nothing was happening. And then the communists came in, and for the last 70 years, they ruled China out of, 4,000 or 5,000 years. This group hasn't changed. It's still the motherland concept. So where have we changed that says, oops, you gotta be careful?
Yes.
So they said, where? How do we do that? What is it that we need to be careful about? And of course, as I've said, there are real national and there are also security interests to be concerned about. But can I also say, when we talk about national interests, that we need to understand the national interest is also in securing people's rights and protection as in a human rights terms, and making sure that we protect our social cohesion, because otherwise, by the time we finish protecting our national interests, nothing left to protect, because we have done and damaged a lot of the things that we should have done to protect. So we can be very careful. Otherwise, it's damaging, it's counterproductive. We're not able to articulate this very carefully. And my view is that we can do better currently in trying to articulate a better position.
And the first word you came up with is the dialogue. Ask, have a conversation, engage.
Yeah.
So I've touched on quite a few topics here, and I thought maybe perhaps I'd do that to whet the appetite. We have an opportunity for some questions from the audience of Chin. We've got a captive for another 5 or 10 minutes. Please take the opportunity. In the second row, is there a microphone? It's on its way. If you could please announce your name and then ask the question.
Yeah, hi, it's good to see you again. My name is Zalman Castell from Together for Humanity. You were talking about the need to define what we mean by a successful approach to diversity and multiculturalism as it applies today. I wonder about your relationship with the word tolerance. A lot of people sort of express the view that tolerance is a way of creating inequality, that there's the one who tolerates and the person who's barely tolerated. On the other hand, I've got a very dear friend who is a Salafi school chaplain. And he says that for him, the word tolerance enables him to be respectful and caring towards LGBTQI people without compromising his religious beliefs. So how do you navigate that particular sort of word?
Context. There's always a context for a word. We endeavor to move away from tolerance to a stage where we have words like acceptance, embracing, great to have, but they're about stages. It's like the growth, of a child or a person. It's about stages. We're gonna learn to walk. We're gonna learn to be able to do all sorts of things and run, and then and get to a stage where we are finally able to be, in one sense, perfect, if there is such perfection. We're not there. I have a view that while I think we shouldn't be just tolerating things, we should be embracing and loving each other in all this wonderful multicultural explosion. The reality is we're not. Is that working? Yep. So tolerance for me, in the right context, it's not a bad thing to have. It's a good place to start. What I can say is this: while we will not all be embracing and accepting and loving multiculturalism, if all of us were to tolerate, I think it's a far better place than not having it in the current place where we are. What tolerance does is, and I come from countries with multiracial, there's a lot of tolerance there. What it does is this: it helps, sets the buffer about respecting. You might like it, but I wouldn't tolerate that. Why? Because there are imperatives that kind of, give me the underlying basis to have that relationship. So tolerance is an important element of where we can start that conversation. Okay. Eventually, We want to progress beyond that. But we're not there yet. I'm happy to take tolerance any day.
Not a bad thing to have. It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Can I tweet that? Another question, please. Front row. Microphone's on its way.
Hi, John Cleary. You mentioned earlier about we've really crossed the Rubicon. The multiculturalism that started in Australia with Arthur Cornwall after the war, bringing Germans, Italians and other refugees out of Europe, assumed an easy path to sort of assimilation through, well, we're all sort of Europeans, we understand the basic heritage and it'll be okay. Post the 70s, that changed. People from foundationally different, diverse communities began to have stakeholding in Australia. Yet in that period, we went from a time, in the terms of philosophy of government, where we went from a tradition of Australia with government having a very active role to a tradition, say, started with Thatcher and Reagan and others, that government is the problem. So government began to pull back from that role. Has we been a little naive in terms of our support for the forms of diversity you mentioned, in supporting them into gaining a foothold in the community? That is, facilitating the things that would give them a stake that is economic and educational flexibility, the ownership of their country.
John, I wouldn't say we're naive. I'd say we've always been nations carefree, easygoing. Mate, she be right, mate. And we still believe in that, and that's how we live it. I'm not saying we should change that, because it has done us good. It has held this country well, served us well. It is part of that reason why our multiculturalism works, because of that very reason. But it's not enough. It takes a bit more sophistication when you have communities that's become so diverse now. The differences are so huge, right? If you're right, mate, it's not going to entirely do it, even though that's an important concept to live by, right? It's therefore look at those differences and look at that diversity we have and say, what are the parameters? See, as a nation, we don't have anything enshrined or written in charters. I mean, in my area, multicultural affairs, federally, I'm not saying states do it very well. There is nothing I can hang on to look to say we're a multicultural country. Apart from the fact we've got a ministry, we've got a multicultural advisory council, we've got Ahmed Pollard. But seriously, there's nothing in the Constitution, there's no act, there's nothing that says we are. All we know is because we think we are. Yes, we are. And we believe in that. And could you have a future simply on that? Wonderful, you could, but you do a lot of work to try and get every generation to buy in, right? Because they're all different. They don't know what the last generation did. So there isn't that clear underlining that foundational documents or beliefs enshrined somewhere that guides us. And having done that, then we need to sit down and say, so where are dividing lines when there is conflicts of issues? How do we deal with that as a country? Right now, it's a lot of goodwill, right? We said, well, somehow we managed that. And we should be able to do that, right? Trust alone, is a great element, and we need that. But you need trust plus understanding how to grapple with it. But more importantly, the common consensus, what it means for us. I've adopted the view that we need to position multicultural or cultural diversity in this country on the very foundation that makes this country unique. So this Australian sense of our cultural diversity. But then we need to articulate what it means by this Australian sense, this Australian nest. So for me, it's like, it'd be a great place when we all understand that it doesn't matter where you come from. You can be Chinese from Shanghai, from a Muslim from Baghdad. But ultimately, you understand that you practiced and you carry on your religion and you exercise your cultural rights within the context of who we are, within the Australian framework. What is that Australian framework? And I've said this before, and I sometimes I get myself in trouble by saying that, but the real left-wing extreme one like that, I said, well, yeah, maybe they don't. But I said, if you can be a Chinese from Shanghai, but if you want to live exactly the way you live in Shanghai, well, you're in the wrong place. Because this is not Shanghai, this is Melbourne, this is Sydney. And what does that mean? There is a context to that, which means you adapt to that. What does that mean, adapting? This is where the problem is. So they tell you, so what can I not do? What must I do different? And we haven't been very good in doing that and saying, these are the core values, these are the things. I think human rights is a good place to start, respecting this and that, right? And we don't do that. And in fact, we avoid, being seen to be in the business of moral or civic education. So we don't teach. But I think they're not about civic education, they're not forcing some kind of education on people. It's about having values that are passed on, that people understand. So a new migrant comes to this country, the things they picked up of what Australia is picked up from their own community, picked up from their friends, picked up what the media tells them, because no one articulates that clearly to them, right? So the question is, what does that mean for us to have that common consensus about what we are about as being Australians? I think we just simply, I'm very careful to ensure that we're not giving license to anyone to put up illogical framework for which we all bundle into, right? But it's simply saying we need to have a community capacity to understand what we're on about and how we share that common characteristics making this country work for us, right? And I say it to some communities, including Muslim communities, because it's important that they do that. And I sit the community leaders down, and I have community leaders. Is this Chatham House roof? No. The whole notion, sometimes you get leaders who are young who think that, this community is going to be strong and powerful in the next 10 years. And then I said to them, I said, okay, to do what? What do you want to do, as a strong, powerful community? And for me, I said, but tell me, how do you see your community and the community? How do you see as a leader where you'd be in 10, 15 years? How your children will interact with my children to build this? If you can't see it, well, I'm concerned. Because you must articulate the capacity to say, this is the way I see it. That your children, my children will be doing this. This is the way we'll move forward. And we don't do that. And that's a conversation we don't have. We need to have that conversation.
Power with purpose and values. Well, folks, that has drawn to a conclusion in terms of the question and answer with Chin. Thank you so much for that time. I would like to invite Peter Doukas, who's the chair of the Ethnic Communities Council of New South Wales, to just provide you with a small token of the appreciation to Chin to say thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Be careful not to break it. They get
Wow.
clumsy as this.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right.
And these opportunities are wonderful photo opportunities.
This is only for my wife and myself. I've got a family of 4. What's the other 2?
He's cheeky. And now,
Thank you very
if I
much.
could,
Thank you.
Chin, I understand that you're shortly going to be equipped with something to present to Pauline. Is she still here? Oh, you're
great.
okay. You are Pauline, the new Pauline. There's a locket. There we are.
That's the other 2 I was hoping for.
Maybe you can do a trade with Pauline.
Great. Thank you very much.
But that has been truly inspiring, folks. And I think we've only got one
Pauline?
more task we need.
She's gone, yeah.
I only have one more task to do, and that's my privilege to invite Ahmed Polat, who's been spoken about a lot today. Please come up. He's the Executive Director of Affinity, to give us some final words and to close today's event. We'll vacate the lounge, I think.
Yeah, good idea.